Fantasy XVI just came out recently, and although I'm happy with any new entry to the main line of the series, I can't help but feel like we need something new. I'm not talking about the franchise or gameplay, but the world it's based in. When it comes to the entire franchise, I'm a bit lost, but from my memory of the mainline Final Fantasy games, the settings usually take place in Western fantasy worlds, especially medieval fantasy. And obviously, Final Fantasy XVI is also based in that similar style. But that's what disappoints me about this new game. I'm tired of medieval fantasies. Now some people might say a lot of JRPGs take place in medieval fantasy worlds, so why am I calling out Final Fantasy specifically? Well, it's because of these two games. Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy X prove that this series can create new and interesting fantasy worlds outside of old European settings. And to be honest, I'd love to discuss more about the contemporary fantasy setting that Final Fantasy VII uses, but what I really want to focus on is the tropical fantasy world of FFX. Because not only is this setting unique to Final Fantasy, but fantasy games in general. And the reason why I criticize Final Fantasy in particular is because they successfully did it once before, so I question why they can't make another game like Final Fantasy X again. And before we get into the thick of all this, let me just say I'm biased because FFX and FFX2 are my favorite games out of all the Final Fantasy games. And that's why I'm even more passionate about seeing another Final Fantasy game that takes place in a tropical setting. Most of the time, if a fantasy game has a tropical setting, it's only a small area that's part of the wider fantasy world. So apart from adding variety to the aesthetics and gameplay, the most of these places add to the lore is by being a port city or vacation spot. But Final Fantasy X created a whole world based on a tropical theme, except for places where it's cold. But even then, the world's unique design was carried through the elements inspired by Southeast Asian and Pacific Islander culture. From the landscapes to the architecture to the people, the influence of these tropical Asian cultures is obvious throughout this game. And that's exactly why this game stands out from any other JRPG. Not only does it turn away from the typical European fantasy setting, but goes even further to differentiate itself by being inspired from Southeast Asian and Pacific Islander cultures instead of East Asian. Obviously, there are still some European and East Asian elements present, but because the majority of the world is oozing with tropical Asian themes, the environment and people stand out more as part of the tropical world design. Even more crucially, the main cast is the biggest reason why this design feels more memorable throughout the game. I mean, look at them! Nearly all the characters have some sort of tan except for the goth girl and the one stuck in temples all the time. As minor as this might seem, I think this detail plays a huge part in conveying the tropical theme of the world, because if you look at the few other JRPGs that center around a tropical setting, for some reason, the main cast is always light-skinned even though they're always out in the sun. I think the only game that has this inconsistency but is still able to maintain its tropical theme is Chrono Cross, because of the heavy use of Mediterranean clothing and environment. Apart from that, even if the entire game is centered around a tropical setting, the fact that its main cast, who you spend all your time with, is not affected by the sun and also wears clothing that is clearly for cold weather takes away from the theme of the world. I mean, aside from noticing how these characters stand out from NPCs, the fact that they don't have any continuity with the rest of the setting makes the world design feel kinda useless in that regard. Because not only does this make the main cast feel separate from the world that they came from, it also makes everything feel like dress up. And by that I mean, the world design feels somewhat superficial towards the lore and story because of the disconnect from important characters and the rest of the world. Coming back to FFX, the most obvious character who feels connected to this tropical world that they live in is Wakka. Not only does his name and character design convey that he is from a unique tropical world, but his English dub voice even has a Hawaiian pidgin accent. So not only does he physically look like a person from a tropical area, but players who are familiar with his accent will automatically associate him with Pacific Islander cultures because of the connection to Hawaii through his speech.
What did you say again?
So when looking at Wakka while he's with his Blitzball crew, he blends right in and genuinely feels like he is from an island called Besaid. Even more so, Tidus, the main character, the person you play throughout the entire game, also blends right in with the crew and the rest of the world because of his design continuity with the setting that is warm, sunny Sphera. And what's better? Just from a lore perspective, players can see how his skin gets more and more tan as he becomes involved in Blitzball from childhood to adulthood. Through this, players can infer that this is due to his training over the years and is likely caused by the tropical climate of Sphera, which again makes Tidus feel more connected to the world. And it's because of these design and lore continuities found in important characters like Tidus and Wakka that the smaller details within the world stand out even more. Whether it be the design of NPCs or architectures of buildings, these small details that are shared between characters and locations, including the main cast, add to the world of Final Fantasy X and build the tropical feel and culture of Sphera. That's why the many ways in which the main cast stand out from everyone in Sphera is also the same reason why they easily blend in. From Yuna's light kimono design being practical for the warm weather while still being similar to other clergy designs, to Wakka's clothes donning similar patterns to buildings around Sphera, to Lulu just being goth while trying to catch a breeze wherever she can, each major character has elements that both ground them to their world but also make them stand out. And that is why Final Fantasy X is the best example of why we need more Southeast Asian and Pacific Islander inspired fantasy games. Because not only does it look good, FFX proves that you can still tell edgy or depressing stories in the sun and on the beach. But yeah, even though FF16 has interesting and new gameplay, I don't really have any strong feelings about the characters and world. Again, I'm just tired of medieval fantasy games, as I'm sure many JRPG fans are as well. So if Square Enix or some other developer out there wants to create a new fantasy world that stands out from what we currently have, I honestly think learning from FFX and taking inspiration from tropical Asian cultures is the best move. Because unlike gameplay or story, which require at least a good minute to draw people in, just the image of a tropical fantasy world is enough to get heads turning. So considering JRPGs are notorious for the rich stories, and new games only ever focus on improving gameplay, I think what the world needs now is a new take on fantasy worlds. Because even though Final Fantasy X originally came out over 2 decades ago, everyone who has ever played it remembers it so vividly and so fondly, including me. And that was because it had an amazing story with iconic characters based on a beautiful world that hasn't been matched since. But I think with the world of games growing as it is now, and the appreciation for every Asian culture increasing, shows that we can still be hopeful, because not only are gamers calling for more, but so are people all over the world. Thanks for watching this video. I'm trying a new audio setup, so please bear with me if my voice sounds a little bit off, but hopefully I'll have my shit together by the next video. As for when that'll come, let's just say my release schedule is like my life, chaotically organized. But that's all from me, so I'll see y'all around.